19-year-old.
Modernism was
very glad to be in Los Angeles right now as an art maker, as an artist.
I'm here in Gresford, North Wales, and today I'm in the studio of Louise Evans and Jonathan Edwards. And my first question to you, what was modernism?
Oh, tough one. I think modernism to me is a breakaway from sort of representational artwork. I'm really influenced by work from sort of the 50s and 60s, sort of Cold War modern design, and I like people like Paul Rand and Saul Bass, and illustrators like Abner Graboff and Miroslav Sasek. So for me, it's sort of a breakaway where people were trying to. It was a different way of seeing things. So I'm really interested, rather than realism, I'm interested in seeing how people reinterpret things through their own eyes. So for me, that's modernism really, but also that sort of like retro-futurism as well. I see modernism as something that's almost the past, but
blurred line. I keep thinking about the rebel, obviously, when these artists were, you know, rebelling against tradition and, you know, trying to do something that was innovative or experimental. And so I think that, you know, that's what it means to me really is, but then that gets to be tricky because obviously what's different nowadays, what's innovative, what's experimental, but really. And I suppose, yeah, rebellion, I think we've all got it in us to sort of not want to be doing what everybody else has been doing or what everybody says we have to do, or using the methods that we have to do, or seeing it as the same as anybody else. So, yeah, whether rebellion's the right word, but it's the closest thing I can think of.
I suppose that's sort of rejection and iconoclasm. And
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things about talking to you both today is that the three of us actually were all in school.
Yeah.
At Ysgol, Bryn, Alyn in
all those years ago.
I think we were the class of 80s.
No, I think it was like 95, 96. And I was a lot younger than you guys. Perhaps it was for you. I sort of vaguely remember you, but.
What sort of trajectory did your career take over that last couple of decades? How did you get here?
We both went to separate colleges. I went to Wrexham originally, did 2 years, and then I went on to Cambridge to study illustration. Louise went to Wrexham, and then you had a year, didn't you, where you trained?
Yeah, I didn't go to college when I first left school. I went to work thinking I want to learn how to sew. I thought I'd go and work in Lower Ashley, but really stupidly not realising that that's factory and it's going to be quite hard going, and wasn't what I thought it would. So within about a few months I thought this is not for me, so then transferred to college and studied fashion. So it was all about clothing, textiles, fabric for me. It's always been about that. But it was a little bit slower for me to actually start working for myself. I tended to work, you know, after leaving university, went to work for people, had a proper job, as I call it, as opposed to the playing that I do now. But yeah, so it was a bit. Whereas I think you obviously pretty more direct with your career.
Yeah, I think I started.
But
first proper illustration commission I was 19 or 20, so I've been working since my teens professionally. I worked for Radio Times. I did comics, and then I just did. I think I had that and a part-time job till I was about 27. But then since then I've worked. I started working for the Guardian newspaper in about '98. Did a lot of covers for their Guardian Guide and their money sections, and I still work for them on a regular basis. But I was always just. It's only in recent years I've done what I've wanted to do. In a way, I was an illustrator. I was asked to illustrate a subject, and I do that. Whereas recently, I've sort of produced work that, you know, just represents me, really, stuff that I've wanted to do.
So you have much more freedom about what you do now.
Yeah, recently, yeah. I had sort of, you know, with the financial crisis, a lot of my art directors sort of like wiped away. A lot just disappeared almost in the same month, and because I had more time on my hands, I was doing more sketchbook work, And it was the sketchbook work that I was doing in about 2008 that then Louise started making in 3D. And this was for no other reason, just for something to do. And Louise has always looked at what I've worked and said, oh, I can make that. And I think the first piece we did like that, even though you've always made gifts for people, the first sort of proper Felt Mistress piece must have been about 2008, 2009.
Yeah, when we started thinking about it seriously.
Yeah.
But I was a bit sort of selfish about it because I worked, as I say, I worked for companies for years, making wedding dresses, bespoke wedding dresses. So still doing one-offs, nothing sort of mass-produced. So still had quite a lot of input into how they were going to be made, how they were constructed. But when I decided to leave that side of it, I got quite selfish, and I thought I only want to do what I want to do, because even though I love sewing and I love dresses, I hated weddings, not really into that. So I thought, life's too short to be doing something that you've got a little bit of an interest in but you don't like the whole thing, so I'm only going to do stuff that I'm interested in. And I think that I've been quite direct about refusing work, only taking on stuff I want. Luckily, obviously, because I had support backup from Jonathan to be able to do that. And I think it just took off, whether that was the reason, because I was being honest about my work finally, after years of, just seemed to be just going, looking for, having to pay the bills. I think that's how it branched out. And so now I think it was definitely selfish over the last sort of so many years.
What was it that initially drew you to working with fabrics generally, which
you mean sort of like years ago?
Yeah.
Well, I mean my mum always sewn, my grandmother always sewn. I mean, my mum used to make things for local church fairs, or I say church fairs, that makes it sound as though she's religious, and she wasn't at all. Probably local, we had like a nursery school that needed to be raise money, and so that they'd make bookmarks or little things like that. So she'd make a lot of things for craft fairs, and I'd always help her. So there's always been a sewing machine in the house, and there's always been people sewing and knitting, and my grandmother did upholstery, so I think it's, I've always had access to that. So I used to just make dolls' clothes. So I've always sewn, really. I've always made things. I think when I first met Jonathan many years ago, I think he said I'd make a good Blue Peter presenter because I'd be able to do the makes. I think that was one of the first, because it was like, I could have got making that. Yeah, but I used to work a lot with wood as well, because my dad's a joiner, and so I used to be making go-karts and things. So it's not all been fabric. It's quite strange. I'd be hammering nails and that sort of thing, but very practical sort of 3D creative stuff rather than 2D stuff. I'm useless at drawing. I have a different brain, I think, than Jonathan, how I visualise stuff.
Because I was thinking, Jonathan, I remember many years ago, you used to sketch all the time.
Yes, I still.
You still do.
Still do, yeah, constantly. Yeah, and I'm never happier than when I've got, a sketchbook in front of me.
I remember, in fact, chickens.
Right,
you used to have chickens in the background.
Yeah, my dad kept chickens.
Yeah. I'm scared stiff of those chickens.
Tell me about how you're obviously drawn to a visual artistic career very young. How did that develop?
I don't know. I've always drawn. I can't remember a time when I wasn't drawing, and it was one of those things my mum used to do to keep me occupied as a child, was give me something to draw on. My dad was a bricklayer, but my dad used to paint a bit. He used to paint people's dogs and horses. So he used to, tell me what pencils were HB, which were soft pencils, what were watercolours, what was Indian ink. And I remember being introduced to people like Gerald Scarfe in newspapers. And I remember watching a Gerald Scarfe documentary, and it was about him being a commercial artist. And I remember that phrase sticking with me, a commercial artist, and thinking, well, that's something I can do. But of course, coming from the background we do, I didn't know anyone who's making a living in art or making a living drawing. But it was something I always wanted to do. I remember thinking as a child, because I used to read a lot of comics as well, that I used to think, if I write it down that this is what I want to do, so I won't forget when I'm older that I want to draw for a living. But that's all I've ever wanted to do.
I remember when we left school, a lot of people went into the army, they went to Sharp.
Yeah.
This is, I think this is how I ended up with Laura Ashley, because I think the teacher had said, oh, you like making things, why don't you learn how to sew? And completely directed me. I mean, thinking back now, I think it's been really good, because the training I had, even though it was only for sort of 8 months or whatever, I wouldn't really take it back. But I can remember coming home and crying every night, thinking, what have I done? I've missed a chance to go to university, and thinking that that was it, you know. And then when I finally did get to university, I think I was such a swot in university, because everybody comes straight from school or straight from sixth form, and they were all like sick of being educated, people telling them what projects they had to do, whereas I was like, I've come from work, and you know, you clock in and you work all day until you can go home. This is just easy. Do you know what I mean? This is just, we're doing like such fun things. And so I think it helped. I think perhaps if I'd have gone from school, I would have been a little bit, you know, a bit more mischievous, and perhaps a little bit like, oh well, you know, fed up of, you know, work, why are they always telling me what to do? Whereas, you know, I think it did help me. I think I was ready after taking those 8 months off or whatever it was. So
I see with my own students, when they go back after being, you know, after being in workplace, after being in the workplace for a while, it's a different attitude.
I can remember the mature students on my course when I was 16, and there's people who come to our college in their 40s, and they were just, you know, they were doing stuff all the time. We think, God, what's wrong with them? But
this is what I was like, you know, doing a project and going home, and then I remembered like going like over that I need more than I needed to do, and people saying, why have you done all that work? And it's just like, because it's like really great, and you know, and really the work you gave me would only fill about an hour, whereas like there's, you know, there's 8 hours, isn't there, of working day. So what am I going to do with the other stuff? Whereas I think that obviously if you've never done that, you're a bit like, how am I supposed to do this project in one day? It's like, you know, it's quite laughable, isn't it? But I think it probably did have that effect on me, which I thank them for now. But you know,
do you think it had an effect on the speed at which you work?
I think that probably did.
Well, yeah, it's so difficult. It's such a long time ago, isn't it?
And of course,
I did so much in between.
When you were making wedding dresses, what was your record? 100 a year?
That was just because of having to do that, because you've constantly got the next person coming in, and deadlines as well. I mean, that's one thing about deadlines. If you work with wedding dresses, the deadline is the wedding day, and there's no ringing them up and saying, do you want to get married on Monday, because I'm not going to be ready for Saturday. So I think there's a completely different attitude to deadlines, because there's nothing more scary than a bride that's like, you know, so I think that's, you know, obviously people are always shocked when I deliver on time, but because they're like, oh right, we said that because we were expecting you to be a couple of days, and it's like, oh, it just doesn't exist in the industry that I was trained in. So you know, I can work to that. So I take it that speed and, you know, attitude to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not sort of you know, that artists.
You're not waiting for the muse, are you? Because
no, you know what I mean. I think there's some people that, like, you know, it's just you have to get on, but yeah. But we work together a lot, so creative blocks, it's easier with working together, because obviously if there's something that I can't get right, then I can ask Jonathan and he can help, whereas I think if you're working on your own, sometimes you can't, you know, you just have to give up that day because it's just not going right, whereas there's always something that I could probably do with working together. I think that's a good thing. So I can't really, you know, moan about people when they have bad days. It happens to everybody, doesn't it? So.
Yeah.
You would tell me before, Jonathan, about some of the deadlines you've had for...
Well, because I do a lot of stuff for The Guardian, if I do things for, say, the money section on the Saturday, if I'm lucky I'll get the phone call on a Wednesday and I'm preparing me, but there'll be no copy as yet. It's just like, are you available? So most of those jobs are perhaps 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock, I'll have a phone call, I'll have the copy sent to me, then I'll do a rough. Perhaps I'll wait like an hour and a half for the editor to see the rough, and then I've got, say, 3 hours to do the finished piece. But I have done pieces for them in 45 minutes as well, where they phoned me up and they said, there's a space missing here, we've got nothing to fill it, can you do an illustration? And then from the phone call to them sending it to press in like 45 minutes.
That is incredible.
That's not a nice way to work, though, is it?
No, it's okay. I enjoy it though, and it sort of streamlines the process, and you're not faffing about, and I've done so much stuff for The Guardian now that it's almost like, it's a bit like a boot camp as well, because once you've done a couple of those commissions and you've had to turn things around quickly, it really, you know.
To what extent is your working practice as an illustrator being about formulating a particular kind of visual language that you have?
It changes all the time, I think. I've always worked, I think my work was a bit fussier perhaps in the beginning, not so much now, and because of deadlines I try and keep things simple, but I do prefer simpler work. But also I'm very much, a friend of mine had trouble. I think he was working for an animation company in America. He'd gone from one studio to another, I think he'd gone from Warner Brothers to Cartoon Network, and he was having trouble making the transition because the stuff he was doing with Warner Brothers was very much based on anatomy, and the stuff he was doing with Cartoon Network was very much more geometric. And I remember a mutual friend had said to him, well, your work is based on shapes, it isn't based on real anatomy. And when I heard that advice he was giving somebody else, like a light bulb went off, and I was thinking, well, yeah, that's exactly how I work. And I think I had struggled a bit with thinking, the head fits into the body so many times, or you put the line across here divided for the eyes, and I don't work like that. I find shapes, and a lot of things I draw sometimes, because I sketch quite lightly, where one drawing overlaps another, and I'll see something from the wrong way up on the page, and so I start with the shape and then move towards the drawing.
Your work over the years has become more stylized, really, hasn't it? Tell me a bit about how you've developed that, and what conscious and maybe unconscious processes are part of that.
I swapped from using a dip pen to a brush, and I think there's a big difference between using a hard implement to draw with and a soft tipped implement. So using a brush, I remember when I first started using a brush, I was thinking, well, this is so easy because there's no way I can make an artless line with this brush. Every line looks nice. And then I found out after a couple of hours, no, I can make really awful marks with this brush. But also I was trying to make things as smooth as possible, and I was looking at work which is reproduced by people like Al Hirschfeld, who worked till he was like 99, worked in the 30s and was working right up till 3-4 years ago, and he died. And when I saw reproductions of his work, it looked like this perfect crisp line, and I was trying to get my line to be as smooth as his. And then I saw some originals, and I could see that this line was broken up. His curves were sort of incrementally going round. And I'd also found a blog online, a Russian blog, where they were talking about different illustrators and how different illustrators use the computer to work with, and how they use vectors. And it was a piece I did for The Guardian, and I was in an example of people who use vectors well. And I've got no idea with vectors. What my work looks like on the computer is what it looks like on the drawing board. And I was thinking, well, what's the point of me trying to make this perfect line if people just think I'm using Illustrator to straighten it out and to correct all those curves? And I wanted a more idiosyncratic line. And I'd also had a pen which had a brush pen which had one hair which was slightly skew-if. So I was getting this sort of like a shadowing with it. So there was this line I was getting with this brush pen, and then I thought, I've got to try and replicate this in another way. So
you mentioned the use of computers as well. Has there been a point during the development of your work where you felt some kind of pressure to use the computer more heavily?
I don't think I'd have been able to make the living as an illustrator if I hadn't started using a computer, because when I started I used to paint artwork, stretch paper, roughs had to be faxed to people. Then I'd go, there was Red Star, which meant you dropped it off at the train station, handed it to somebody, it was put in a tray, and then somebody picked it up the other end. Whereas now, like a 45-minute commission, there's no way I could have done that without working in the offices with them. So when I started working with computers and just colouring my work digitally and emailing it, then that changed everything. I didn't need to have a part-time job anymore. I could take on all these jobs that previously I couldn't. But I always before I had a computer and I was trying to use gouache or acrylic, I wanted this perfect flatness. Whereas when I got a computer, the first thing I wanted to do was try and break it up. So I scanned in watercolour, I scanned in textures. So now I want my computer work now to look more organic as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways which you mentioned then as well is just in terms of the communication, and thinking back to growing up in Wrexham and being educated in Wrexham, and not having the type of role models in this kind of industry in Wrexham. Yet you both still live in Wrexham, and you're successfully continuing, very good international careers. Tell me a bit about what living in a place like Wrexham, how that affects how you work and how you deal with work.
I think being isolated from everything that's going on, you're not quite you don't feel quite so competitive because you're not surrounded, you're not going out and seeing how much everybody else has done or what everybody else is doing. So obviously you haven't really got that outside noise that you get. I think if you were living somewhere really hip and cool where everybody is an artist, I think I would feel a little bit suffocated by that. So I think I quite like, because we go to London, I've got lots of friends who live in London, we spend like, you know, because with work we have to visit there a lot, and sometimes I just think, oh my god, it's just like, how are we all getting work? There's just so many people doing this, and you know, how are we all continuing to do stuff that's different and that's, you know, and so I think that it's quite nice to come home and to be, and also you work hard because there's nothing else to do, is there? You can't be nipping out all the time. But I quite like that. I think that because with the internet as well, I mean, you've got access to everything. I mean, I know years ago my friends would ring me up and talk about stuff as if we wouldn't know what it was because they live in London, and it's like, well, what do you think, you know, where do you think we live? I mean, it's, you know, I've got access to everything that you've got, really. Just not on my doorstep, as it were. But you know, I think it's quite nice. I think it's much less stifling for work. But again, disadvantages. I'm making it sound really positive, aren't I? But I don't know.
I mean, obviously, it's
I've convinced myself. I've convinced myself.
Yeah,
but
socially, it's not.
Socially, it's quite hard, isn't it?
Because we don't, you know, we know more people in Osaka than we do in Wrexham.
Yeah, we
which
don't
is strange,
really,
considering we've born and raised here.
And I think obviously I have to be organised as well, because I can't nip. I mean, I don't really have anywhere that I can nip out for materials or. I mean, obviously basic stuff, but you know, the internet, I have to order everything, which I think would be quite nice to be able to go for a walk and pick up what I need from a shop. But you do have to be a bit more organised. But yeah, no, I think I'm glad I'm not amongst it all. I think sometimes, even though I like to go to the parties and be amongst it all, and then come home and think I haven't got to stress out about.
Yeah, back to the bunker.
Yeah, you can sort of go into hiding and produce stuff. And then crawl out when it's done.
Yeah, I feel like that a bit about living in Newcastle in Australia as well, that I can kind of dip back in it.
Yeah. You make the decisions whether you're happy, whereas you're not constantly, you know. And obviously, you know, financially it means that we can travel, and you know, all my friends in London never go on holiday because they just, you know, they're paying ridiculous rents, whereas, you know, we like to travel. And
we need space as well.
Yeah, I need big space. Yeah. I mean, we're really growing out of this house now, you know, just because both of us hoard. I mean, Jonathan hoards paints, pens, brushes, nibs, and then obviously books as well. We've just got a crazy amount. So, I mean, I don't know, I couldn't change to a flat without having some sort of storage, you know, facility somewhere, but it would be hard. Yeah.